January 11, 1944. High above the frozen fields of central Germany, the air is thin and merciless. At 25,000 feet, the temperature sinks far below zero. Oxygen masks fog with every breath. Engines drone in a steady, mechanical rhythm, vibrating through aluminum frames and human bones alike. Below, the Reich sleeps uneasily. Hundreds of American bombers move eastward in tight formations, B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators, sunlight flashing off their wings like shards of glass. For years, this sight has meant something specific to German fighter pilots: intercept, strike, disengage, survive. But this morning feels different. From the west, sleek single-engine fighters appear, low, fast, disciplined. They do not turn back at the familiar boundary lines. They keep coming. Silver noses, long wings, dark exhaust stains trailing behind them. In Luftwaffe cockpits, pilots glance at fuel gauges, then at the sky behind them. The escorts are still there. For the first time, German pilots understand a quiet, terrifying truth. The bombers are no longer alone, and the way out they once relied on is disappearing. That realization does not arrive all at once. It begins here, in this cold January sky, shaped by years of decisions that led inevitably to this moment. By late 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a dangerous stalemate for the Allies. Strategic bombing, once thought to be a decisive tool, had proven costly. The U.S. 8th Air Force had sent wave after wave of B-17s and B-24s deep into the Reich, but the Luftwaffe had adapted. German pilots, flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Foch, Wolf 190s, struck with precision, often inflicting heavy losses before retreating to safe zones near their airfields. Escort fighters existed, the P-38 Lightning and the P-47 Thunderbolt, but their limited range meant that beyond certain points, the bombers were vulnerable, exposed over hostile territory. Airmen knew the cost of every mission. Bomber crews counted months in terms of sorties flown. The Luftwaffe calculated attrition in the rising toll of experienced pilots lost. By mid-1943, losses had grown unsustainable on both sides. American intelligence noted the increasing skill and aggressiveness of Luftwaffe interceptors, while German command felt the pressure of relentless bomber raids that threatened not just factories but cities. Each new operation became a game of timing and chance. How long could a bomber group remain intact under flak and fighter attacks before returning safely to England? The limitations of earlier American fighter escorts had been painfully clear. The P-47, a workhorse of high-altitude performance, could dominate locally but lacked the fuel to accompany bombers to deep targets like Leipzig or Berlin. P-38s fared slightly better but still fell short when raids penetrated into central Germany. The Luftwaffe exploited these weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. German pilots flew layered defensive tactics head on attacks against bomber formations, altitude advantage maneuvers, and coordinated strikes timed with anti-aircraft artillery. In the months leading up to January 1944, bomber losses had reached critical levels, forcing Allied commanders to reconsider the fundamental approach to deep penetration raids. American strategists understood the stakes. If bomber crews could not reach their objectives without heavy loss, the war's momentum in the air, and eventually on the ground, would stall. Plans for longer range, more capable fighter escorts were already in motion, though the full impact was yet to be seen. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe, confident in its ability to punish unescorted bombers, remained unaware that a new threat was about to rewrite the rules of aerial engagement. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the Luftwaffe's vulnerabilities like never before. in a cold January sky where survival would depend not just on skill, but on timing, technology, and endurance. By January 1944, the Luftwaffe's air defense network was a carefully orchestrated system. Radar stations stretched across the Reich, feeding information to command centers that dispatched fighter units to intercept incoming formations. The German doctrine relied on speed, surprise, and altitude advantage. Pilots trained for head-on attacks against bomber formations, coordinated strikes, and rapid disengagements to minimize losses. Every sortie was measured against attrition. Every pilot lost was irreplaceable. Experienced Luftwaffe aces were both assets and symbols, legends whose deaths weighed heavily on morale. Yet, despite this structured defense, cracks were appearing. Allied intelligence had begun to understand Luftwaffe patterns. Bomber formations followed predictable routes. Anti-aircraft fire could be timed, and certain zones offered brief but crucial respite. Pilots had memorized them, corridors where, after surviving initial attacks, they could adjust altitude, throttle back, and escape pursuit. This fragile confidence, built over years of survival and experience, created a false sense of security for the German pilots who would face the January 11 raid. The American side was evolving rapidly. The P-51 Mustang, a fighter with unprecedented range and performance, was entering service in growing numbers. Equipped with the Merlin engine, long-range drop tanks, and improved maneuverability, the Mustang could escort bombers deep into the heart of Germany. A feat previously impossible. It was not just faster than most Luftwaffe fighters, it could stay with the formations to Berlin and back, fundamentally altering the calculus of air combat. For the first time, bomber crews had a realistic chance of reaching their targets with near-continuous protection. German pilots, however, had no forewarning of the scale of this change. When the 8th Air Force prepared the mission for January 11, 1944, the Luftwaffe anticipated their usual pattern: heavy bomber losses near the Reich's edge, disengagement before deep penetration. But the Mustangs would challenge every expectation. Their presence was not just human-angle bomber crews and German pilots. The men inside the bomber formations were no longer faceless silhouettes. They were individuals with names, families, and years of experience etched into their faces. Inside the pressurized fuselage of a B-17, gunners checked ammunition belts with hands numbed by the cold. Eyes scanned the horizon constantly, seeking the telltale glint of approaching fighters. For American crews, the P-51s represented hope, a guardian presence they had not known for years. Relief came with the roar of Merlin engines cutting through thin air, yet tension never eased. One miscalculated maneuver, one burst of enemy fire, and the fragile chain of survival could break. For the Luftwaffe pilots, the human toll was immediate and psychological. Veterans who had relied on the Reich's safe corridors found themselves facing a relentless opponent. A single P-51 could prevent disengagement, forcing a German fighter into combat under conditions where retreat was no longer guaranteed. The realization was chilling. Every attack now carried far higher stakes. Panic, caution, and aggression competed in the cockpit, all amplified by bitter cold, engine noise, and the risk of falling behind formation. Tactical angle escort penetration. Before the Mustang, escort missions were defined by range limitations. P-47s and P-38s could accompany bombers only to the borders of enemy territory, leaving the final leg to the mercy of anti-aircraft flak and interceptors. The Mustang changed this equation. Its extended range allowed the 8th Air Force to plan deep strikes with continuous fighter protection. This meant that the Luftwaffe could no longer rely on the traditional tactic of striking bombers when they were most vulnerable, then retreating safely. The German pilots now faced a fully integrated threat: bombers defended by fighters capable of sustained engagement at all altitudes. Engagement strategies had to adapt instantly. Head-on attacks, previously effective, were now countered by agile, long-range Mustang maneuvers. Luftwaffe leaders had no playbook for an enemy that could shadow them relentlessly while simultaneously protecting its own bombers. The tactical paradigm of interception had been upended in a single, bitterly cold January morning. Technological angle. The P-51 Mustang, at the heart of this revolution, was the aircraft itself. Powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the P-51 combined high-altitude performance, extended range, and nimble handling. Drop tanks extended its operational reach beyond 300 miles, allowing escorts to penetrate into the heart of the Reich. Armament was formidable. 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns provided lethal coverage against both fighters and bombers. Compared to the Messerschmitt Bf 109 or Fock Wolfspecht 190, the Mustang could climb faster, dive sharper, and sustain prolonged engagements without running out of fuel. Yet technology alone was not decisive. Pilots trained rigorously to exploit these advantages. Formation flying, energy management in combat, and coordination with bomber groups amplified the Mustang's effectiveness. It was a combination of machine, skill, and strategy that created a game-changing moment for the air war, one that German pilots had never faced in such numbers or with such reach. These angles converge on a simple, profound fact: January 11, 1944, was not merely a clash of planes. It was a collision of human experience, tactical expectation, and technological breakthrough. Leadership angle, strategic decisions at the top, at the command level. The January 11 mission reflected careful planning and bold decision-making. General Karl Spaatz of the 8th Air Force coordinated bomber routes with fighter escorts in unprecedented depth. His goal was clear: to maintain bomber integrity while striking at German industrial targets deep within the Reich. On the German side, General Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters, faced a dilemma. Intelligence suggested a growing presence of long-range escorts, yet Luftwaffe resources were stretched thin. Orders emphasized aggressive interception without overcommitment, but pilots lacked precise information on the scale and endurance of Mustang coverage. Leadership choices would shape not only the immediate outcome of the mission, but also the long-term viability of Germany's air defense. Enemy morale angle. Luftwaffe pilots confront a new reality. The psychological impact of the Mustang was immediate and profound. German pilots, many of whom had become experts in disengagement tactics, now faced an enemy that could shadow them relentlessly. The once reliable, safe zones, behind which they could regroup, no longer existed. Reports from Luftwaffe units describe mounting tension and hesitation in the cockpit. Actions previously automatic now required careful reconsideration. Pilots had to weigh aggressive engagement against the growing risk of being trapped or outmaneuvered. The Mustang became a symbol of inevitability, eroding confidence even before guns fired. Moral and human cost angle. War is measured in losses, but the introduction of the Mustang reframed those calculations. Bomber crews who had previously felt exposed now had a lifeline, but the Luftwaffe pilots, many barely in their 20s, faced a grim calculus: fight against an opponent who could not easily be outrun or disengaged from, or retreat at great personal risk. Casualties, forced bailouts, and downed aircraft were no longer just numbers. They were real, imminent threats to human life that each pilot felt in the pit of his stomach. The moral stakes, intertwined with survival instinct, added a layer of intensity to every dogfight. Ethical reality of air dominance, the Mustang also represented the broader strategic shift in aerial warfare. The ability to impose air dominance not through sheer numbers alone, but through technological superiority and sustained presence. For Allied commanders, this opened the door to sustained bombing campaigns deep within Germany with lower losses. For the Luftwaffe, it raised difficult ethical and strategic questions: how to deploy finite resources against an enemy whose reach had suddenly expanded, without incurring catastrophic losses. This was not simply a battle of planes, it was a confrontation of principles, risk management, and human endurance at the edge of the stratosphere. By combining these angles, human, tactical, technological, leadership, morale, and ethical, the full significance of January 11, 1944 becomes clear. The Luftwaffe faced a new world of constraints, while the Allies held a decisive, transformative advantage. January 11, 1944 began like any other winter mission for the 8th Air Force, but the stakes were higher than ever. At dawn, bomber crews assembled in England, engines warming in the frigid morning air. The target, a synthetic oil plant near Brunswick, deep in the heart of Germany. Fuel was vital for the German war machine, and the Allies understood that striking it could accelerate the collapse of Luftwaffe capability. By 09s and 15, the first waves of B-17s and B-24s lifted off. Formation leaders checked compass headings, adjusted altitude, and coordinated with fighter control. From the west, long-range P-51 Mustangs streaked toward the bombers, Merlin engines humming with relentless precision. Their mission: escort the bombers for the entire round trip, ensuring that every crew had protection where previously none existed. Over northern Germany, German radar operators spotted the incoming formations. Command flares were fired, scrambled Bf-109s and F-190s climbed to meet them. The Luftwaffe believed their experience would be enough. A standard intercept: gain altitude, attack the bombers head-on, then disengage before facing escort retaliation. But when the German pilots reached the bombers, the Mustangs were already in position. The first encounter was brief, sharp, and disorienting. German pilots reported an unexpected aggression. Mustang fighters not only blocked their approach to the bombers, but pursued them if they attempted to climb away. The Luftwaffe's tactical assumptions, the safe disengagement corridors, the predictable bomber formations, were being shattered. High-speed passes became hazardous, evasive maneuvers, previously sufficient, now invited relentless pursuit. Pilots found themselves trapped between heavy bomber defensive fire and superior escort fighters. At 12:30, over Brunswick, the engagement intensified. B-17 gunners opened fire, coordinated with Mustangs diving from above. German aircraft were hit, some spiraling down, while others struggled to break away. The cold January sky echoed with bursts of gunfire, engine strain, and the distant thrum of distant flak. Reports from both sides noted a disorienting mix of chaos and precision. Mustangs in tight formation, supporting the bombers, while the Luftwaffe fought to regain the initiative, but found their usual tactics ineffective. It became immediately apparent. The Luftwaffe's escape routes were compromised. Pilots could no longer rely on disengaging after an attack. The Mustang followed, pressured, and protected the bombers. The German doctrine of safe, calculated interception had collided with a technological and tactical reality that made retreat nearly impossible. As the raid pressed deeper into central Germany, the Luftwaffe pilots faced mounting frustration and fear. By 13:15, German formations were scattered. Some pilots attempted traditional head-on attacks, only to be met with coordinated Mustang counter maneuvers and flak from the ground. Others tried climbing above the bomber stream, hoping to regain energy advantage. But the Mustangs, lighter and more agile at altitude, matched their every movement. The psychological pressure was as punishing as the physical strain. Oxygen, starved, cold, and aware that retreat was no longer a guaranteed option, the Luftwaffe pilots were trapped in an aerial vice. Casualties mounted. Bf-109s and Fu-190s were destroyed at a rate that stunned German command. Reports later indicated dozens of aircraft lost, with many pilots either killed or forced to bail out over enemy territory. American bombers, remarkably, sustained fewer losses than expected, largely due to the constant presence of the P-51 escorts. For the first time, Allied long-range bombing missions penetrated deep into the Reich with near, continuous fighter protection, a capability the Luftwaffe had never encountered in scale or endurance. At 13:45, the turning point was unmistakable. German pilots recognized the tactical impossibility of disengagement. Orders to regroup or retreat were ineffective against the relentless escort coverage. Veteran aces, accustomed to dictating the terms of engagement, found themselves forced into reactive combat. Pilots later described a sense of inevitability, a sky dominated not just by numbers, but by superior reach and coordination. The implications extended beyond the immediate raid. Luftwaffe morale suffered a severe blow. Commanders began reassessing their defensive doctrine, realizing that their long-established control over Reich airspace was slipping. For American planners, January 11 proved that continuous long-range escort was achievable and effective, paving the way for increasingly ambitious missions. By late afternoon, the skies over Brunswick quieted, the surviving bombers turning west toward England. The German interceptors, depleted and demoralized, retreated. The encounter had lasted hours, but its significance would resonate for months. The Luftwaffe had confronted a technological and tactical evolution that left them without a clear escape, altering the balance of the air war permanently. The immediate consequences of January 11, 1944 were stark. The 8th Air Force returned to England with bomber losses lower than predicted. Fewer than 5% of the formation had been destroyed. This was a remarkable improvement compared to earlier deep penetration raids, where losses often approached double digits. The P-51 Mustang's extended range and aggressive escort tactics had not only protected the bombers, but also inflicted significant damage on the Luftwaffe, with dozens of enemy aircraft destroyed or damaged. German reports from the day reflect the shock among Luftwaffe units. Experienced pilots, who had counted on predictable engagement patterns, now faced a reality in which retreat was no longer guaranteed. Units operating in the northern sector of the Reich noted unprecedented attrition. Pilots reported increased stress, confusion, and hesitation in the cockpit, behavior previously considered unlikely among veterans. The combination of heavy losses and the psychological strain of inescapable engagement began to erode operational efficiency immediately. On the Allied side, the tactical success had far-reaching implications. Bomber crews gained newfound confidence in long-range missions, understanding that continuous escort reduced vulnerabilities significantly. Mission planners saw the Mustang as a transformative asset capable of enabling sustained strategic bombing campaigns deep within Germany. With the proof now in practice, the 8th Air Force could consider more ambitious raids, knowing that escort coverage could reach targets previously deemed too risky. Operationally, January 11 demonstrated a crucial shift. The Luftwaffe could no longer dominate the skies over the Reich by relying solely on traditional interception doctrine. Commanders began issuing warnings that prior engagement methods were obsolete against long-range escort. Pilots now faced the grim reality that each sortie carried heightened risk, even in familiar sectors. The German air defense system, once confident in its ability to control the sky and protect industrial hubs, had encountered an opponent capable of sustained disruption. The first tremors of a larger strategic shift were visible. With the Mustang escort proving its effectiveness, the Allies were no longer constrained by deep penetration limitations. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, faced an accelerating decline in experienced personnel and tactical viability, setting the stage for future confrontations where the skies would increasingly favor Allied air power. In the weeks following January 11, the long-term impact of the raid became clear. Luftwaffe units faced not only a shortage of aircraft, but a growing deficit of experienced pilots. Losses among veteran Bf-109 and Fdo-190 pilots were irreplaceable in the short term, and training replacements could not keep pace with operational demands. Reports from Luftwaffe High Command expressed concern that future missions would face escalating challenges as the Allies increasingly integrated P-51 escorts into every deep penetration bombing operation. Strategically, the raid marked a turning point. Allied planners, buoyed by the success, began preparing for Operation Argument, commonly known as Big Week. In February 1944, a concentrated series of attacks on German aircraft production. The Mustang's proven ability to escort bombers to the heart of Germany without succumbing to attrition allowed planners to target critical factories and assembly plants with confidence. Each subsequent raid built upon lessons learned on January 11, refining formation strategies, escort coordination, and route selection to maximize impact while minimizing losses. The psychological toll on the Luftwaffe was profound. Pilots and commanders alike understood that traditional doctrine, rely on speed, surprise, and disengagement, was no longer sufficient. The realization that the Allies could maintain constant escort coverage shattered previous assumptions about the limits of American reach. Morale declined as the inevitability of sustained losses became apparent. Even seasoned aces expressed doubt, recognizing that their tactical advantage had eroded, replaced by a relentless, technologically superior adversary. In broader terms, January 11 highlighted the accelerating decline of German air superiority. Industrial targets that had once been shielded by effective interception were now vulnerable. The Luftwaffe, stretched across multiple fronts and increasingly depleted, could no longer enforce a protective envelope over the Reich. The day underscored a fundamental shift. Air power had become not only a matter of quantity, but of quality, endurance, and technological reach. By the end of January, it was clear that the momentum of the air war was moving decisively in favor of the Allies. The stage was now set for reflection on what this transformation meant, not just for the immediate tactical landscape, but for the trajectory of the war. January 11, 1944 was more than a single raid. It was a moment when the balance of air power irrevocably shifted. The skies over Germany had revealed a stark truth: technological innovation, when paired with skill and strategy, could redefine the limits of warfare. The P-51 Mustang, with its extended range and unmatched agility, transformed the bomber escort from a temporary shield into a relentless guardian, forcing the Luftwaffe into a confrontation it could neither avoid nor easily escape. For German pilots, The cold January air carried a new weight of inevitability. The doctrines they had relied upon, safe disengagement, predictable corridors, tactical superiority, were now challenged by a relentless and capable adversary. Each sortie became a test of endurance and courage under pressure that could no longer rely solely on experience. For the Allies, every pilot and bomber crew that returned safely reinforced the promise of strategic bombing as a decisive tool, altering the trajectory of the war over Europe. Beyond the statistics and outcomes, January 11 left an enduring lesson about human and technological adaptation in warfare. Air combat was no longer solely about numbers or local skill. It was about integration, endurance, and innovation. The psychological impact of facing an opponent who could deny retreat reshaped not just tactics, but morale and strategic planning. In the cold light of history, the encounter reminds us that technological breakthroughs, like the Mustang, can change the course of conflict within a single day. It underscores the interplay of human courage, leadership, and innovation, and the profound consequences when one side gains a decisive advantage. 1904 stands as a cinematic testament to the evolution of aerial warfare. A day when the Luftwaffe confronted a sky they could no longer control, and the Allies glimpsed the new horizon of air dominance that would carry them